Hi, my name is Andrea Perez and I will be presenting Digital Imaging and Photography for COMS 532, which is a Liberty University course. Please click to the first slide. The most popular visual medium of all communication technology is, of course, photography. And the textbook estimated in 2017 there would be 1.3 trillion photos taken. Well, now that it's 2019, we can look back and see that 1.2 trillion photos were taken in 2017, which is really amazing. But more incredible than that, 80% of those images were taken with a cell phone, 5.6% were selfies, and 62.8% of the images were taken and posted by women. Next slide, please. So photos and social media nowadays seem to be completely intertwined. Digital photography has converged the cell phone and computer industries, and the way images are used has drastically changed. The textbook coins the term social surveillance, and they use this term to talk about facial recognition technology. They say images can be scanned, and facial recognition software uses video and images to help pinpoint individuals' locations. So we tag people in photos, and therefore we aid in easier tracking of ourselves and our friends. Next slide, please. So before all this newfangled digital technology happened, regular photography had to get its start somewhere. On this slide, you'll see the first photo ever taken in 1826. It's called A View from the Window at La Grasse, and it was taken from Joseph Niepce in his camera obscura. He took it using a polished pewter plate coated with bitumen of Judea, which is an asphalt derivative of petroleum, washed the final plate with a mix of oil of lavender and white petroleum. So I could go on about how a lot of early photographers died from the different chemical processes that they used, but that's a whole nother presentation. So unfortunately, he did die a few years after he took this image, but not before he met and started working with Louis Daguerre. So Daguerre was credited for a long time with being the first photographer. Niepce has since gained his place in history, but Daguerre in 1839 released the first publicly available photographic process, which he termed the daguerreotype. So since then, though, for 150 years, at least 150 years after that, the photographic process really didn't change much. Cameras were, well, what you see before you is a lot of different cameras. These date back as early as 1900, but they still use a film process. So there's daguerreotypes, tintypes. People would take images on glass plates. There was dry processes, wet process, and then eventually film, autochromatic, continuous tone. There's different sizes of film that people can fit in all these cameras. But it wasn't until 1975 that Kodak developed the first digital camera, and we'll talk about that in a minute. I just wanted to point out one last thing on this slide that the textbook brought to light, which was since 1906 people have been manipulating photographs, and I knew it was earlier than that though, so I did a little bit more research and remembered that it was Matthew Brady who in 1865 actually was known for manipulating images. He took a famous photo of Civil War generals, and since two people couldn't make it to the photograph session, he input them into the photo later. So it's really almost since the beginning of photography that people have been manipulating images, which is pretty incredible. Please click to the next slide. So what you're looking at here is the first digital camera, and it was invented by Kodak and could take a 0.01 megapixel image, which is really hard to imagine an image that small with as much data as we can fit into one image today. But it works the same way that digital cameras today do. It records light onto a sensor, and voila, you have an image, just in the same way that light was recorded on film to create an image. But the ability to scan, manipulate, disseminate, store, and track images, that is where all the improvements have come in the last 40 or 50 years when it comes to digital imagery. And apps today, phone applications, make manipulation very easy for the average consumer, for really anyone. Please click to the next slide. I thought here that it was important to try to make people understand, or help people understand, the difference between what full frame and a cropped frame sensor means. When you're talking about full frame, it's what most professional photographers, what kind of camera they're going to have. They're going to capture a very large digital file, which takes up the entire frame, much like a 35 millimeter film would take up the image would be part of the entire part of the film. So if you look on here, you can see that a cropped sensor is almost half the size. They say it's 1.6 or 1.5 is the crop factor, but if you look at how much smaller that image actually is, you're losing a lot of digital information. And even more so, if you look at that little red box in the bottom left corner, you'll see that that is your average phone crop factor is of 6. So that's a very tiny file. But of course, having a lot smaller digital file size does not deplete the fact that a cell phone can really take an immaculate, amazing image. And if you move on to the next slide, you'll see what I mean. So the largest recent impact on digital imaging and photography industry is the use of mobile phone cameras. And here you'll see the 2016, 17, and 18 award winners, the first place award winners for Apple's iPhone photography competition, and they are amazing images. Please click to the next slide. Disruptive innovations is another section that the book talks about. They talk about Apple's Lynx technology, high dynamic range images, and apps. I actually added drones myself because I think they've become quite popular since this book was released. When you're talking about Lynx technology though, it is a computational technology, and it's a camera array technology bought in 2015 by Apple that allows for the development of multi-aperture camera phones. So if you've ever seen the images that have a very narrow depth of field that were taken by a phone, it's because they're layering their aperture on those phones, and they're layering their images on the phone itself. So it's really an illusion. They're blurring the background and they're keeping the front very sharp. Not quite the same as if a regular digital single lens reflex camera was to take the same image. It would be using the different lens elements to get a narrow or longer depth of field. High dynamic range technology. This allows for about a third of the sensors. So normally only about a third of a sensor's photo sites capture an image, but with HDR technology it captures much more of that image. So it captures most all the shadows and all the blacks, and then also most all the whites in the image. So your final image shows so much more than you can actually see when you took the photo. It's the same as how our eyes work. We only see about a third of what's in front of our eyes when it comes to light, and the rest of it is interpolated by our brain essentially to make up what we see before us. So this technology, it does the same thing. And then applications. Phone applications allow for easy manipulation of even a technically bad photo, and it can be fun for consumers to be able to combine images, add stickers and borders, add video, or even add music to the images they have. Drones is the last part that I had added. The text talked about Apple's 3D technology, but after some research I found that a lot of people now, since the book was released, say it was really a failure in technology. So I bring up drones because their prevalence has kind of exploded in the last few years, and what's so interesting is that they allow people to take to have a bird's eye view, to take imagery or video from a location that maybe they couldn't otherwise, and I think that's part of the popularity. Please move on to the next slide. So finally, the results of advanced available digital imaging technology include less printing. The book calls it jump to screen. So all these photos are being taken and none of them are being printed. One of the downsides or dangers I see with that is accidentally losing imagery or digital corruption when it comes to imagery, which is why I as a photographer, I have all my stuff multiple backups just in case that happens. DSLR camera sales have also been decreasing because of being able to have a phone in your back pocket, or the book brings up MILC, mirrorless interchangeable lens technology. People love being able to look at a digital back on a camera and see the image they're going to take and just exactly take that image without having to come up with do the math and work the numbers and using a standard camera, trying to understand what aperture and shutter really means. And then also the photo and video the photo and video application market is on the rise, which is positive. And then film photography for hipsters, I guess, is making a comeback. You could say even Polaroid released a camera recently that allows for photos to be printed right out of the camera. Please click to the next slide. So photography as a career field, this was actually one of the smallest sections throughout the whole book when it comes to talking about career fields. The book projected an increase of 3% in the field of photography, which they do say is slower than the average industry, and they also suggest that the opportunity is found in integrating digital imagery with other industries. So working as a journalist and a photographer, or a photographer and a graphic designer, instead of just trying to become a photographer. And then I also added retail and advertising, because I think there's a lot of money for photographers in the advertising industry and also retail. And what I mean by retail is wedding photography, family photography, people photography, really is where more money would be, owning your own studio especially. Please click to the next slide. So, my question for you stems from the fact that I'm a photographer and I really feel like I'm working in a dying industry, and my concern is that if the technology is available to everyone, how valuable am I and my ability as a photographer? So that's where I get this question. Now that the access to digital photography is more affordable, available, and widely shared throughout the social media landscape, do you think the average person has lost appreciation for the value of photography as a skill and as an art form? I look forward to reading your answers. Thank you.